out there had a safe and happy Easter holiday. Mace, it's good to be back in the saddle with you here, my friend.
Good to see you. How you doing? How was your weekend?
Weekend was really good. Weekend was really fun. Talked to a lot of Broncos fans because I was a featured artist at a comic book convention. And of course, in addition to talking about funny books and superheroes and spandex, I got a lot of questions about Sean Payton. I got a lot of questions about Russell Wilson. I got a lot of questions about what this team would be looking for in the draft. And oh yeah, it just so happens to be my headline on Mile High Monday, available at denversports.com. Mace, there is a draft shopping list for this team. And you and I have said it before. We've talked about it with Luke Musgrave and the potential for the Broncos to perhaps move up in this draft. But when they're having a top 30 visit with Michigan's Luke Schoonmaker, well, then you can go, wait a second, they just want a tight end. That's on the list. We'll get to other positions as well, but their draft shopping list, maybe the top priority. It's like when you need eggs, right? Which are super expensive now. But, like, there's always that top priority. I know it's a staple of my diet, Mace, but, like, there's certain things that you need more. You need milk. You need whatever more. I'm mentioning dairy products brought to you by dairy farmers. But anyway, like, no, what you need at the top of the list for the Broncos, they might think it's tight end.
Yeah, it's always what do they do, not what they say. And in this case, it's what they're doing and what they're saying, specifically what Sean Payton said or didn't say regarding Greg Dulcich when he was asked about him at the league meetings a couple of weeks back. And now we see a parade of tight ends on the Broncos list of 30 players to interview. I hate calling them top 30 because it's not the top 30 prospects. It's just the 30 that they want to talk to.
Right.
But there's an outsized number of tight ends here. I think probably the most significant was Luke Musgrave because, as you and I talked about last week, that's somebody who you probably have to get back into the first round in order to grab, which tells me that they are not out of the mix of trading one of their receivers for more draft capital. But by and large, in what is a deep tight end class, it looks like that's the position that they are looking at first and foremost, which tells you they're not happy with what they've got in the room.
Yeah, I'm not happy with what they've got, and they're going to add competition. One thing that I've mentioned on Twitter, the most important thing ever, is like, hey, we all love Greg Dulcich. We love his hair. He is a receiving weapon. There's no doubt. And whenever we talk about another tight end added to the room, it's not because Dulcich can't play. It's because Dulcich at this time is one-dimensional and seems to be injury-prone. He can change that, and that's the great thing about these players, Mace. Every year in the draft, regardless of who we talk about, we're talking about them as they are right now. What have they done to this point? What have they shown? Have we seen flashes of them doing more? I'm not writing off Greg Dulcich by any sort of stretch of the imagination. I don't think the Broncos are either. They just want more competition, and they certainly do angle towards having a tight end that is more of a complete player than Dulcich is.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the other thing, the complete tight ends, and they're relatively hard to find. You can find plenty of pass catchers, you can find plenty of blockers, but the ones that distinguish themselves, unless they are positively electric as pass catchers, like, say, Julius Thomas was back a decade ago, you're talking about somebody that you're looking for somebody who can do both, who can be the dual threat, and a lot of these tight ends the Broncos have talked to are dual threat guys.
Yeah, and with Julius Thomas, they had another guy that they took that same year from Nevada, Virgil Green. Mm-hmm. I remember at the Super Bowl, it was after he had left the Broncos, and I can't remember which Super Bowl it was, but I ran into Virgil. He's like, I'm the best tight end in the league. I was like, oh, okay. I mean, I love the confidence, right? But you had the blocker, and I do believe Virgil was underrated as a receiver. But he was such a good blocker. And sometimes we see this, Mace, and it's kind of weird. I think back to a Daniel Graham. I think to a Mercedes Lewis, right? There are others, I'm sure you've got some in mind as well, where they come into the league, they're really, they could be a pass-catching weapon, but they're such good blockers that's kind of how they're known. Like Mercedes Lewis, a great receiver, but he's been mostly a blocker to this day in his career. And Daniel Graham, I felt the same way about as being a great tight end. And, oh, yeah, now he's in the pros. He's just a blocker.
The funny thing about Mercedes Lewis is that he went through a phase where he was a pass catcher and then he became
Right.
more of a blocker as he got older. In fact, I can tell you, I recall having a conversation with Justin Outen, then the Broncos offense coordinator, but he'd worked with tight ends in Green Bay, having a conversation about Mercedes Lewis and kind of getting him at that stage of his career to become a willing blocker and a very good blocker. But not everybody can make that type of transition, and not everybody is willing to be a willing blocker. A lot of willings in that statement, right? But with Greg Dulcich, to go back to him for a moment, it's not that he isn't willing, it's can he physically do it with the history of hamstring injuries. And also, I mean, he comes in, he's 243 pounds, and you see him build wise, you have to say, okay, can he put on additional muscle to be a factor in the blocking end of the game without sacrificing what he is as a pass catcher? And not all body types allow for the ability to add 10 to 15 pounds of good muscle to be able to get in there and be an inline tight end.
Right. And it's one of the reasons why I know it's weird, Mace. The weigh-ins, people are like, why you need to see them in their skivvies, like in their underwear, standing on stage? Well, you can tell their frame. You can tell by their body type. You can tell how a person carries their weight. I think of Mount Cody, right? Back when pictures weren't allowed at the Senior Bowl weigh-in and someone snuck a picture of Terrence Cody, who was pretty sloppy at 350 or whatever he was. But yeah, I mean, there is a certain look that you can look for and say, okay, it looks like his quads are maxed out, but maybe some upper body strength. Like, yes, you can tell by looking at a body type, and it's one of the reasons why, again, when the Broncos cleaned out their lockers and I'm just in a scrum and all of a sudden, like, hey, there's someone next to me. I was like, oh, it's some media member I don't know with long hair. It was Greg Dulcich. Like, he doesn't necessarily have that Thor-like build. He doesn't need it. I'm not saying that. But his build is somewhat slender compared to other, Albert Okwuegbunam looks like a Greek god, right? He's chiseled.
Yeah.
Greg Dulcich, not as much.
Well, and Greg Dulcich looks like he's carrying all that he can carry muscle-wise. Like, that's the thing. Like, I wonder if some of the hamstring issues last year that he had weren't a result of just kind of everything being too tight on him. And that's where, good training can certainly help, but you often have to work within the limitations of what that body is and what that person can do. And the other thing is also just going further into the Broncos looking at tight ends. Look, Sean Payton may simply not like the draft work that has been done at a certain position leading up to this year. And he will have plenty of players carrying over that will get a chance to prove themselves. But if he's looking at the roster and looking at the players and studying them, and I think, again, given a chance to really to answer a question about what he thought of Greg Dulcich a couple weeks ago, and the answer was very short and not effusive. You compare that to what he said about the Broncos that were signed by him and his regime in free agency. I think it's fair to put two and two together and say he's just looking for something else, something that isn't in the room right now.
Yeah, and that's what Sean Payton wants, and guess what? Sean Payton's going to get what he wants to get. Now, the draft shopping list has other positions. Our draft previews are going on right now, denversports.com. Everyone check them out. I am actually writing up wide receivers today. It's not a great group of wide receivers. There's some guys. There's always some guys.
There are guys every year. There's never
guys
a bad
every
year
year
for wide receivers.
It just seems like we're getting star-studded, and then like, okay, less star-studded this year at wide receiver. That's for another show, another day. But on the draft shopping list, I know fans are going to say offensive line. What about you, Mace? Not necessarily specific players, although we can talk about that if you'd like, but is there a position that you yourself would like to see the Broncos emphasize on their draft shopping list?
I mean, offensive line's always one. I think even if you feel like you're set on the offensive line, you're not set. You can't have too many guys because at some point you're going to have to shuffle around. You're going to have your depth tested. That's true for almost every team that has passed through the NFL, that you're going to have to go to multiple offensive line units to get through the year because of injury. So even if you're in good shape, you're looking for the offensive line. The Broncos, they're in better shape than they were when free agency started because of Powers, because of McGlinchey, but they're not all the way there just yet. You've got
Right.
Garrett Bowles coming off of his injury. You have Lloyd Cushenberry, who's in the last year of his contract. I feel confident about Powers, Miners, and McGlinchey. And if Garrett Bowles can be healthy, I feel confident in him in the short term, but not the long term. And thus, you're always looking to add. So, offensive line for me, tight end. I'd like to see if they can find somebody who's more complete than anybody in the room, because you've got Albert O, pass catcher, Greg Dulcich, pass catcher, Manhurts, more of a blocker. I would also take a look at safety, and it's not a really good safety crop this year, but I think you still have to look at what's there. And this is where we're sitting here on April 10th. Kareem Jackson is still unsigned, right? So he's sort of in that Latavius Murray category, where if you can find somebody who could develop into a starter and at least gives you a solid relief option behind Caden Stearns, if you can find that player in the draft, then you can go forward with a young safety core around Justin Simmons and know that you're covered. If you don't get a safety that you're comfortable with, if they have to step in and play, then I think you bring back Kareem Jackson after the draft. But I think for that reason, I think you're taking a look at safety, and I think you're also taking a look at edge rusher, just because there are so many question marks that you have at that position. Even though where you draft, you can find players, but the group is going to be pretty well picked over by the time the Broncos go on the clock.
It is Cecil Lammy, Andrew Mason, Orange and Blue today, presented by Champ Honda. And I had this headline in mind because I know you love good headlines. Not alliteration, Mace, but maybe some of our favorites, stuck with leftovers. Like, hey, some of the leftovers, sometimes leftovers better. I always say that around Thanksgiving. Those turkey sandwiches on November 30th might be better than the turkey you have on Thanksgiving Day. That's just me.
The flavors meld a little bit. I mean, I think I find that with like casseroles, even some stuff like Chinese food and things like that.
Right.
Seafood doesn't carry over in leftovers, but like chicken dishes, turkey dishes, for some reason those tend to work. So yeah, sometimes you can get a different flavor that's actually a better one with the leftovers. And also a more cost-effective meal as well, because you've already paid for it. You're basically getting a second meal out of what you paid for the first meal, right? And that brings us to, when you're talking about free agency leftovers, yes, cheaper alternatives. Yes.
Yeah, and cheaper. You mentioned like the Kareem Jackson, the Latavius Murray still out there. I bring up stuck with leftovers because this is a direct quote from Samaje Perine, who said, he's excited about an increased opportunity. So as I'm thinking of the headlines to write in our banner here, like increased opportunity, I was like, no, stuck with leftovers. I thought that was interesting that Samaje Perine said he was stuck with leftovers behind Mixon on third down. And now he's excited about an expanded opportunity. So we have a motivated veteran back, and his yards per carry, awful as a rookie, then significantly better, but then has gone down by about a yard over the last 3 years. Top of my head, Mace, correct me if I'm wrong. But it's like, okay, and I guess you and I will continue to have this debate. Like, what's Samaje Perine going to look like with a more expanded role, certainly while Javonte Williams gets healthy?
I mean, he's not as explosive as he was earlier in his career, and I think that's part of what you see in the lower per touch, lower per carry numbers. I mean, I'm expecting somebody solid. I don't expect anybody explosive. You're just, I guess the way I would put it, and I mean no disrespect to a Honda Accord, but he's kind of a 2012 Honda Accord, right? He's reliable transportation to get you from A to B, but nothing. But I think his dynamic days are probably pretty well behind him.
Okay, well, the Broncos looking for some dynamicism. Is that right? Is that a word? I think it's a word, right? Dynamics?
Either dynamic play or dynamism.
Dynamism. Okay.
Dynamism.
I wrote about it in Mile High Monday because the Broncos are looking at Keaton Mitchell, the East Carolina running back who runs a blazing 4.37 and also is an elite receiver. I don't even want to say receiver out of the backfield because then that gives you the idea like, oh, swing passes or screen passes. No, we're talking about Mitchell lining up at the slot. I wouldn't even be against putting him out wide at times. So you have an elite pass catcher. You have a guy with blazing speed. There's your lightning to go with some of that P. Ryan and Williams when he's healthy thunder, Mace. When you heard about the Broncos' interest in Keaton Mitchell, what were your thoughts? Because this is kind of right down your alley. We both think that as much as we love him, coming out of Tulane, Tyjae Spears, not Tyjae Sharp, Tyjae Spears is not going to be there at 67. Well, Mitchell's going to be there, graded mostly as a 4th or 5th round pick. The Broncos' interest has you saying what?
I wrote about Keaton Mitchell at denversports.com, so I'm fully on board with him as a 4th, 5th round situational back. I believe it was Pro Football Focus mentioned that he led FBS in double-digit gains by running backs this past year. Incredibly explosive, particularly in the passing game, but he's explosive as runner as well. That being said, he's 5'8", 179, so this is somebody who you're going to have to monitor his touches, and you're not going to send him up the middle. He is lightning, and he's lightning in space, outside of the hash marks, probably even outside the numbers if you want to extend it further. You're trying to set him up in mismatches as well. But he's a real interesting chess piece, and the thing is, if you believe Javonte Williams is going to get back, then what you are looking for is somebody to complement Javonte, right?
Yes.
And so you basically, or Javonte, or whatever bigger back you're going to have. You're saying, we're going to get the power from running back A. We need running back B to have a different skill set so we can use him situationally and we can focus on week-to-week, possession-to-possession matchups to maximize that. And in that role, I like Keaton Mitchell a lot for the Broncos. I mean, you can say Keaton Mitchell or Deuce Vaughn. I mean, that's kind of the debate because we're talking about two smaller backs. I think Mitchell, in some ways, and you mentioned the pass catching, might actually be a slightly better fit than Deuce Vaughn.
Yeah, I would vote Mitchell in that scenario, Mace, because with a guy like Deuce Vaughn, even though he's compact at 5'5", you also are talking about a very small window to throw to. And in today's game, you're going to need those pass catchers who are electric. And as we've mentioned, Mitchell's the type of guy that could play receiver or line up in the slot. He's not just that receiver out of the backfield and, draw plays, screen passes, whatever, normal small back stuff. He is a smaller back, but he's got receiver ability and a larger catch radius, which I think factors in.
Yeah, these are key things, especially with a quarterback in Russell Wilson who has a dynamic threat to him, but he's not always the most precise passer. Even when he's at his apex, this is not Drew Brees getting the ball exactly to the spot. It's somebody who needs a little bit of a cushion, a little bit of a buffer zone, a little bit of a margin for error. And Mitchell, being taller, having a longer reach, he can provide a bit more of that. And look, it is a game of inches. Inches count. 3 inches on your frame, that can count, and that can make all the difference from time to time. And so that just plus the fit as a complement to whatever power back you're going to have, I think Mitchell probably makes the most sense. I'm all about Spears if he's available at 3. I would be willing to blow up a draft plan to make him one of my 2 picks there at the top of the 3rd round if Spears falls that far. But if not, then you are looking at running backs who can be considered incomplete pieces. Every running back's got a question, or every running back's got something that they're missing once you get to round 4, round 5. But I think what Mitchell is missing is not something you're going to miss if you use him in the proper way.
Right. Before I let the Samaje Perine thing go, Mace, I'll bring up a little bit of history. And this is one of the reasons why I love doing a show with you every day, is because we can bring up this historical data most of the time off the top of our heads. Although I'm getting a little older now. But why couldn't P. Ryan be a Mark Ingram? Mark Ingram, and I know they're different players and different styles specifically, but I believe it took 6 years for Ingram to be a 1,000-yard rusher. He always had it. And he was always that, first round pick. He's the guy, he's the man. And then he never really was the man. And then he kind of was the man. And I understand for running back, usually running back, it happens fast. A guy comes in, he produces now. Clinton Portis shows up, doesn't get started until like week 5, and he rushes for 1,500 yards as a rookie. And by the way, he was down to about 180 by the end of his rookie season. But there have been your Thomas Jones. Remember him coming out of Virginia as a top 15 pick, top of my head. And, Jones kind of bounces around, spent half a year with your Buccaneers. And in that half a year, it kind of clicked for him. And then I think it was like Chicago, Kansas City, the Jets, and then Thomas Jones was a really, really good running back. So it took some time for guys like him. It took some time for guys like Mark Ingram. Could that be the case for Samaje Perine, even though he does not have some of the explosion that he used to have?
Maybe, but the thing is, I would look to the yards per carry data on Ingram compared with Perine. And this is where Ingram was going over the course of his career because he got 1,000-yard season in year number 6. Okay. His yards per carry the first 5 years, 3.9, 3.9, then 4.9 when he only had 78 carries, 4.3, and then 4.6, and then finally his first 1,000-yard season, 5.1. So Ingram, on a per-carry basis, was on an upward trajectory that Perine really isn't. That, to me, would be a difference between the two of them.
Yeah, and Perine on a downward trajectory. Again, top of my head, I think it was 4.8 a few years ago, and what was it last year? 4.1 for Perine, and that's significant. I mean, we talked about it with Melvin Gordon, and, we're going to be fair with these guys. We're going to look at what they've done, and with Perine, I think that is something to consider. Like, okay, you were almost 5 yards a carry a couple years ago. Now you're barely 4 yards a carry. That's that could be a sign of something.
And you could argue 4-1 behind a better offensive line as well.
Yes.
Because the Bengals did shore that unit up in a big way last year, which even though they didn't go as far in the playoffs, offensively they were probably a more efficient team last year than the year before, in part because of the upgrades they made up front.
Okay, Orange and Blue today. Cecil Lammey, Andrew Mason. Of course, OBT is presented by Champ Honda. Mason, Mile High Morning, which is on DenverBroncos.com, our good friend Eric DeLala, who was hunting Wolverines. I always tease Eric that he sounds like Napoleon Dynamite. But anyway, he had an article and a quote from Sean Payton, who is a Golf Channel or something. And he was caught on the golf course, and he said, the offseason needs to be difficult. Now, pretty much anything Sean Payton says, I fall in love with. The old school Bill Parcells, overweight men and windbreakers yelling at you. That's what football's all about. So I'm maybe the wrong person to talk about this. But when he's like, man alive, this needs to be difficult, I'm there for it. And he had talked about how, last year's going to come up because it happened. But they're really trying to put that in the past. And yes, there will be some difficulties, even with the first meeting, which I believe happened today, because he said, hey, our first meeting is going to be the day after Easter, and we're gonna get after it. And the offseason needs to be difficult. So I love it, Mace. What about you?
I think I love it for this specific team. I love it for this edition of the Broncos because I'm not saying you should go all Bear Bryant, Texas A&M Junction boys here, right? But there does need to be some weeding out. I believe it was the late Bo Schembechler who did something similar when he got to Michigan back over a half century ago and said those who stay will be champions, right? You need some of that. You do need to crank up the toughness and make every day to some degree a test. Now, look, it's not going to look the way it did 50 years ago, nor should it. We know much more about training. We know much more about hydration, all sorts of things than we did then. So I'm not sitting here saying it should be totally old school. But you can have a new school camp, a new school off-season protocol that is still tough, rigorous, and demanding. And some of it's going to be in the classroom as well. You need to be on point in demanding what everyone should know about the scheme, and have kind of mile markers and say, okay, this everyone needs to know X by May 1, X by June 1, X by June 16 when you end up wrapping up OTAs or minicamp, pardon me. There are ways to do it, and also just general accountability as well. Now it is voluntary, and that's the thing, voluntary, right? We're going to break out the air quotes to describe it. And I'm not going to begrudge someone for choosing not to show up. But I will say this, if a player chooses not to show up and be a regular at Sean Payton's work, that will probably put them on the outs with Sean Payton. This in some ways, this is going to be a Parcellsian, Belichickian, break them down and build them back up process over the next few months.
Right. And there was an old Dennis Miller line that said, if you think you're paranoid, well, that's going on your permanent record. So, okay, it's voluntary.
Yes.
But if you're not there, that will be noticed, because I'm sure there will be a lot of people who are there, who are ready to work. And what's interesting to note, again, bringing up history, Tom Coughlin, first, I don't have anything wrong with Tom Coughlin. The great man. I've heard a bunch of great stories. But when Tiki Barber, I believe, right? It was Tiki, it was Michael Strahan that went to him and said, hey, we need more of a velvet touch. I mean, they win a Super Bowl, 2 Super Bowls. So I think Sean Payton right now needs to be a hard ass.
Yeah.
Maybe a year from now, when he's found his guys, maybe 2 years from now, whatever the number is, Mace, I think he will need more of that modern day coaching. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. But different teams need different things. And when you've had 6 consecutive losing seasons, I think you need a tougher touch. Now, here's the thing, and I'm going to get into a subject here that I'm sure is going to be a discussion point in a couple of months. Do you want this offseason work to end with a day off, to end with field day, or do you want them to go all the way through using every day that they can?
Every day.
Okay.
I hate to sound like Vic Fangio every day, but yeah, every day. I want work every day. The results haven't been there. Give them work. No field day. No running with an egg on a spoon, hacky sack or whatever, a potato sack race, whatever. None of that. No work.
Yeah. No 3-legged race. No.
Right.
Anything like that.
Egg toss. That's what it was, right? Egg toss.
Egg toss.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll say this. If they have hit Sean Payton's goals for them as a team, I don't want to see a field day. I wouldn't mind seeing a day off. I'll give you an example. Doug Petersen in Jacksonville last year, I think he gave veterans 2 or 3 days off at the end because he'd seen the progress that he wanted to. So I think maybe you do put a carrot like that out there. Not a field day, you guys can go. You get an extra day to go to Cabo or whatever like that. And if they meet all the terms of that, absolutely, I think give them, the players, that respite. Give them that day. They would have earned it. And this is where I'll trust the guy who's been a head coach for 16 years, most of them really successful, to know what that threshold is going to be if he gives them that free day at the end of minicamp there in mid-June.
Now I got to know, Mace, because you have calves of steel. What did you crush at field day? For me, it was tetherball. I'm like a tetherball champion. So what was it for you at field day?
I think I got a blue ribbon in the standing broad jump. Remember that?
Oh yeah.
Not the
with
long
those calves, you should.
Not the long jump, the broad jump, right?
Yeah.
I think I got a blue ribbon in that, and then I was part of some relays that won at field day. Those were the 2 things that I did the best in, but I do remember finishing first place in the broad jump.
Oh, the relay. What a stress, man. Because especially if, like, I'm not the fastest guy, and I would be more of this on the slower end during my relays, and I would be like, so much pressure.
Yeah. I was afraid that I was going to drop the baton or the flag or whatever,
Right.
whatever the heck it was that we were using. I can't remember. But yeah, that was the field day was fun. It was like it was when we came back for a few days after Memorial Day, because we didn't close down our schools before Memorial Day. We did it after. When we came back from Memorial Day, you do it, and then I think it was like always for us, like the next to last day of the year,
Right.
and then you shut it down. You'd have the half day. By the way, I don't know why schools even bothered to have kids come in for the half day there at the end of the year. No one cares. It's just like, just don't have it.
Yeah. We get into water balloon fights on the last half day in the school. So.
And then you got older. It was basically yearbook signing day, right? Hey, have a neat summer.
It's Andrew Mason. He's signed a lot of yearbooks. I am Cecil Lammy. We are Orange and Blue today, presented by Sean Ponda. Certainly appreciate everyone for riding along with us here as we continue through the Broncos information. The draft is a couple of weeks away. We've got you covered top to bottom, round to round. Andrew Mason and I here, Orange and Blue today, also on The Fan. And, of course, our draft previews at denversports.com. He's Mace. I'm Cease. So until next time, you know what to do. I want you to do a few things. Be safe, be kind, know that you are appreciated. Stay tuned, and please, always, stay frosty,